I read 7 books in February, and this is going to be my February wrap up. And I'll go through all the books that I read in order of best to worst. There were some good ones in here, and some decent ones, and others not so good. But I'll get into all of that. Before I get into it, please like and subscribe and tell us what you think of the books if you've read them. There's some pretty popular ones in here. I got some Brandon Sanderson and some Stephen King in here, so tell me what you think about the books. And also, guys, this video is sponsored by the Critical Reader newsletter. Sign up in the description. First off, I have at number 1 with a rating of 82, Abortion and the Politics of Motherhood by Kristin Luca. This is a sociological / legal studies kind of non-fiction book about abortion and the politics of motherhood. It was released in the 80s, I believe. And I wanted to read this because I really wanted to get a sort of pre-social media look at abortion, and this is in the States, and just see what the actual vibe was like, what was happening. I really did like this book. It is a pretty good book. It goes over vital legislation that has really shaped the the conversation around abortion and the legality of it. Also, what I got from this book as well was, and which has been sort of a very underrated part of the discussion, is how physicians played a big part in the legalization of abortion, and how it kind of went from it being purely the physicians deciding to women getting more of a say into it. So it's really good. We get a balanced perspective of both pro-life and pro-choice people. Luca did her research, Kristin, did her research well on that. It was interesting seeing the personal stories of people regarding why they are on either side of the fence regarding abortion. So this is a very good book. Definitely recommend it. Number 2, with a score of 80, is Reinventing Africa, Matriarchy, Religion and Culture by Ife Amadiume, sorry. This is a very good book. Very, very good book. As soon as I saw this cover and the subtitle and the title, I knew I'd love it. Ife goes off in this book, really. It's a short book, it's about 200 pages or so, but it left me wanting more. Ife critiques a lot of people in this book, and just especially Western academics and the sort of, I guess, bastardization of African history and anthropology, was also sort of shoehorning Western literature and mythology onto African culture, specifically in terms of, especially with academics with a gendered view on African societies, and also just concepts of Freudian concepts that have been sort of twisted to try and get answers as to why certain African cultures are constructed the way they're constructed. It is a very, very good book. With Matriarchy, and I'm reading more books about Matriarchy, I've got a ton on my TBR. With it, and what I found, and it happens in this book as well, is that there's no sort of clear definition as to what it really is. A lot of people, a lot of feminists try to sort of romanticize matriarchy, and because they're against the patriarchy, they try to make it seem like it's not the same side of the coin to patriarchy. And so the definition gets blurred a lot, because when people talk about patriarchy, they're very clear as to what it is. There's no, there's no confusion about it. But matriarchy and matrilineal societies, all of that isn't as clear cut, like the definition. And then also, what are we defining as a society? Is a community a society? We get these problems when we talk about matriarchy and matrilineal societies, because a lot of people don't even view them as worthy enough to be considered. They don't meet the threshold of a society, of a civilization, even the community. The general discourse, it seems to me at least, is that there's never been a matriarchal society. But in Reinventing Africa, Ife challenges this, and she looks at particularly an Igbo community in eastern Nigeria that practices matriarchy, and she goes over, how life is formed and how the family unit is and the division of labor, who has economic control and whatnot. So there are matriarchal societies, and I can see why a small community like the one if you was talking about in the book kind of gets overlooked. But does it meet the threshold? And what even is the threshold? So this was a very good book. I'll talk more about this because this was a good book. I've not done my synopsis of it properly, but I did like, and I highly recommend it. And there's more. It is beautifully written as well, so really good. I got a library copy which I like. So number 3 we have The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson with a score of 74. I have an individual book review about this and a sort of overall general review about the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy. This was a good wrap up to the series. I liked it. It's a very clever book. It's not better than The Final Empire, which I rate the highest out of the Mistborn series, but it's definitely better than The Well of Ascension, but it suffers more from the things The Well of Ascension suffered from, especially with how things drag in the middle of the book when we have sieges. This book also had that problem, but it is a very, very clever book, and it's the first book that I felt had the classic Sander launch. The ending was beautiful. It was crazy. The things that happened, the way it all got wrapped up was just very well done, and the resolution was on point. I could not fault the ending at all. Everything else I can find a lot of fault with, but I think on a reread, this series will be better. But for now, it's got a score of 74, and I'm glad I read it. I'm glad that I've experienced Sanderson, and I've got more to read out of him. So we'll see how things go. At number 4 with a score of 56, I have The Pimping of Prostitution, Abolishing the Sex Work Myth by Julie Bindel. This was a pretty decent book. Julie Bindel is a very famous British feminist. She's done a lot of work about prostitution, trafficking, all that good stuff. She has recently, made headlines, I guess, on social media for her views on the OnlyFans porn star that slept with 100 guys in 24 hours. I forgot her name. And she was saying that how she's actually the victim, and everyone on the internet was just like, no, she is not. But reading her work, I can understand why she holds this view, because part of this book is her research that she'd done, where she interviewed, I think, just over 100 London men who have paid for sex, and just their views on prostitution in general, the rights of the women that they pay for, etc. And just even her whole struggle with, I guess, the activist and the intellectual and the media side of, sex work and prostitution and labor and drugs and all that good stuff. I could see why she has such strong views, and so much so that she would say that OnlyFans woman is the victim, and she's kind of shifting it onto the people who pay for her and pay for her lifestyle as opposed to her. You can definitely see why. This book is okay. It reads, it's very accessible. A lot of subtitles, which I love. I love subtitles. Give me subtitles. She kind of catalogs movements, activist groups, and stories from all over the world regarding, prostitutes, and also she critiques legislation, the Nordic model, the New Zealand legislation around prostitution, and even the British about, what they've done and whatnot. So It's good. It does feel kind of hollow at times because, I mean, the pace on this is good, but she doesn't stay in one place for a long time. And is one of the big problems with it is that she could have really trimmed it down and highlighted a few things and really analyzed it, as opposed to just being like just basically an all-in-one place to find different sort of charitable organizations that kind of help prostitutes, and just stories about academics and their failings in trying to help, I guess, curb prostitution, and even how lawmakers have struggled also. So it's a decent book. It's a decent book. Number 5, with a score of 46, I have Comparing Religions Through Law, Judaism and Islam by Jacob Neusner and Tamara Sonn. This is a very dry book, very academic, very dry. I'd recommend this if you're very much interested in comparing religions, and if you're interested about looking at Judaism and Islam through its legal structures and how those are supposed to be, those hold a very vital corner of those religions on how people are supposed to behave and conduct themselves. I did learn a few good things from this as well, so it wasn't like a waste of time or anything. It definitely wasn't for me though, but I am glad I read it. And yeah, so yeah, if you're very much, you gotta be very interested in this to enjoy this really. And it looks like I'll be sticking to Christian theology, it seems, but I'm glad I read it. At number 6, with a score of 43, I have The Stand by Stephen King. I finally got through this monster 1,300 page book. I DNF'd it several years ago. I got up to page 100 and I was not with it. But I kept it on my bookshelf and I decided to continue reading it. I remembered what had gone on. If you don't know The Stand, it is a classic. A virus wipes out the pretty much 99.9% of the population, and we're left, with stories of the survivors. And then it kind of goes from a post-apocalyptic into more fantasy and horror genre, with people having the same type of dreams about a dark man that represents bad and Mother Abigail who represents the good. And we have two sort of camps, and people all over the country who are looking for a community either travel to those two communities. And we kind of see characters as they try to build communities, as they're prepping for this confrontation and whatnot. So yeah, the ending is decent by Stephen King standards. It's better than Under the Dome, which is the first Stephen King book I ever read. This is the second. There's a lot of character work in this. There's a lot of character work, and I like that Stephen King likes to really wallow in a character story. But he wallows too much. he really wallows too much. You can tell he kind of just goes off and off and off and off, and then most of it really isn't relevant and really doesn't sort of add to the characters really. This book could have been and should have been 800 pages, and even then it still has its problems outside of that. So people really love this book. People really regard it in high regard. I don't. It's not for me. It's a decent read, and I'm glad I read it. It's one of those ones where it's I was about to say under average. Why am I forgetting what the below average? Jesus, it is below average. It's a Sunday. I'm filming this on a Sunday. I need to rest. It's below average, but it's still pretty decent. So if you're really interested in Stephen King, if you're really interested in post-apocalyptic books with a hint of horror and fantasy, but not too much, you might as well read it. The worst book I read in February that I do have a video up on about, or I will. The Atlas 6. I keep doing this. The Atlas Complex by Olivie Blake with a score of 17. This is the last book in the Atlas trilogy, and we have crashed and burned, essentially. I love The Atlas 6, which is the first book. I rated it, I think, 92. It's one of my favorite books ever. And then the second book was just absolute rubbish. The Atlas Paradox, rated at 35, thought it was poor. And then we continued the trend downwards with the Atlas Complex. What can I say about this book? There's no point in reading the series. This is the most disappointed I've been in a book and in a series ever. And the descent and the decline is the steepest that I've ever read in a book series ever also. And I'm just thoroughly disappointed. Thoroughly disappointed. The thing about this series is that the first book is so character driven, and that's why I loved it. And I'm usually kind of one for more balanced, sort of story. It was so beautifully character driven that the plot that she needed to create couldn't come to fruition because one, the writing and the character driven story in the Atlas 6 is just so great, kind of overwhelms everything. And it seemed to me like this shouldn't have been a series, that it kind of actually should have been a standalone, and the Atlas 6 should have been bigger and the whole thing wrapped up within that story. But yeah, this is a dark academia book that definitely fell short. Yeah, I still need to read like other dark academia books like The Secret History and If We Were the Villains. I think that's another one. But yeah, very disappointed in this. On your screen is a playlist of other book reviews and book stuff. Have a look. You will definitely find something you like there. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.